Hello and welcome to Grouchy Old Geeks episode 54. My name's Steve, my co-host is Scott.
Hello.
We're welcome to February in 2021. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Things are looking slightly better.
Yeah, I think things are like you say, things are starting to look up. We'll see. We might be having on our face come February 2022, but we'll see.
Yes, we can look back on this one and say, oh, well, that was a strange year and how wrong we were. But things look to be good. So, I'm gonna stay positive. So we've got some news and reviews, and then we've got an interesting main feature we're going to talk about. But what news have you got, Scott?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with some really sad news, and I'm sure you know where I'm going to go with this. Okay. But since we last recorded, and I think I mentioned this on a recent show, that I'm doing my first rewatch in years of both of our favourite TV programmes, Babylon 5.
Yep.
And of course, one of the stars of that was Ambassador Delenn, played by the brilliant Mira Furlan. And very sadly, she passed away in the last month since we last recorded.
Yes.
And really sad. And I think probably I kind of, not that I wouldn't have noticed anyway, but I kind of noticed it more because I'm regularly watching her doing essentially the performance of her career in Babylon 5. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really, really sad, and I just one of those things where I didn't want to let it go without mentioning it. But there's not much more to say about that, unfortunately.
No, I know Bruce Boxleitner recently did an interview talking about the fact that more fans are seeing Babylon 5 for the first time because it's on HBO now, and new fans are discovering it. And then they also discussed Mira as well, and he just spoke very fondly about how much of a lovely woman she was, and as his on-screen wife and friend in the show, and real friend in real life. So, but yes, the cast, the show has lost quite a few of its cast, sadly, over the years. But it's they're not that old, but they've had various problems and health issues and so on. And so, sadly, yes, a few of them have passed away now. Mira as well. So, but as you say, the work still is there for people to go back and enjoy and look at her remarkable performances.
Yeah, and I'm
5 years,
and I'm watching it at the time when I remember from the first time round it was always a great show, but I'm just at the point where it's like really, really kicking off. So in the Shadow of Zahadum, Divided Loyalties.
Yep.
Brilliant, and actually, I never realised, but in between those two episodes is Confessions and Lamentations, right, which is all about a pandemic. So
yes,
appropriate time to be watching it.
Absolutely, yes. There's stuff in there that's quite prescient of the future, especially in a later episode to do with social media and fake news. There's something to do with a very dangerous president in there. There's all this sort of stuff that's comes full circle to the present day. But anyway, so I'll go on to some good news. I think this will excite you because they're doing a sequel to one of your favorite films ever. They've announced it's currently in active development, Paddington 3.
Wow.
Yes. It's
awesome.
Underway, yes.
Yeah, I actually can't remember whether we've talked about it on the show, but in our little WhatsApp group, me and one of the other guys are constantly going about what a brilliant film the Paddington films are, with no irony. Like Paddington 2 is one of the most tightly plotted films I've ever seen. Like every single thing that gets said has a payoff later.
Yeah,
so many callbacks. Absolutely outstanding film. And I didn't know that the third was coming along, but it's well deserved.
Yeah, so it's Studio Canal, the people who did the first two, are working very hard on the third film. And I guess it's kind of watch this space to see when it comes out. But yeah, I thought that you liked that, a bit of good news.
Yeah, brilliant. So the next bit of news I had is more posed as a question, and you're going to have to remind me whether we spoke about this in the last episode. But I was just wondering whether you were watching and what you thought of WandaVision.
I am watching it. Yes, indeed. I'm up to date as of present. So I think there's been 7 episodes we've seen.
Brilliant. So tell me, how are you finding it?
Okay, so without spoiling it for people who haven't seen it, or for those who aren't up to date, because I know some people don't watch it week to week, and that annoys me when people just assume that everyone else is up to date. The first 2 episodes were quite slow, and it took some time to build, but you could see there was stuff going on in the background, and I was quite willing to stay to see where it was going. And I think with every episode, it's got better because they've revealed more and more. They've sort of peeled layers off, and they've set up various things, and then they sort of a bit of bait and switch and all this kind of clever stuff. So I think it's a lot cleverer than it appears to begin with, where at the very beginning, it's a sort of 50s or 60s sitcom type thing. And it moves forward in time, almost like generationally. And the credits are very clever. Like one was Bewitched, and then the next one was Malcolm in the Middle, and the next one was like, I can't remember, something else, but they change the credits every week. So that's really clever. What about you? How do you feel about it?
So it's let me start by saying it's a show that I'm really pleased that it exists, in the sense that, and again, I'm sure we've talked about this before on the show, where if you watch all of the Marvel movies in sequence, which I did relatively recently, it's very telling that at the beginning, it really feels like they're trying to do something different with each film, almost a different genre with each film. And you've got the sort of upbeat Iron Man films, and then you've got the Winter Soldier, which is like a Cold War spy sort of a thing. And then, the Thor film, each film feels quite different.
Yeah.
And then we hit Guardians of the Galaxy, which I think is a brilliant film. And then after that, all the films that came after that was sort of slowly starting to conform to every single film that came out, had the tone and the feel of Guardians of the Galaxy a little bit. And I really love that with WandaVision, they're trying something very daring and very different. They're actually doing something that's genuine, that feels to me like it's genuinely different and original. And I'm glad it exists, and I'm praising them for that. Having said that, I kind of find it unwatchable.
Oh, really? Why?
But I'm completely putting my hands up and acknowledging that it's my fault.
Okay.
But I watched the first couple of episodes, and the amount of payoff where there's something that says there's something interesting going on, versus the amount of homage to really old TV comedies like I Love Lucy and things like that.
Yeah.
The ratio just wasn't right for me, and I just couldn't. I found it very difficult to watch those 2 episodes, and in fact, I watched most of both of them on fast forward.
So have you only watched the first 2?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I tried to watch the third one, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it.
So the thing is, this sounds. I mean, we used to, in the old days, we talk about series, and we'd say, "Oh, it really gets going in series 2." And that would be 22 episodes a season, 45 minutes. This is 10 episodes, and they're about 22 minutes of actual show, and that's it. So this one, the first 2 are slow, the small payoffs. The third one is a little bit better. The fourth one completely spins things on its head and reveals a lot of the stuff you thought you knew, and it changes the perspective of the show for most of that episode. And thereafter, the perspective of the show is quite different. So the payoff thing changes because it becomes something else. There's a lot of dramatic irony in the first 3 episodes of the show where one of the characters doesn't know what's going on and the audience does. So it's painful because you're waiting for them to catch up. From episode 4, without spoiling it, the show changes massively. And you get there's a moment in season 4, episode 4, where I didn't know what was going on. I had to rewind it to understand what was happening. And then it clicked into place. So I would suggest, if you can, watch episode 3 on double speed and watch episode 4 on normal. And if you're still not hooked, then that's fair enough. I'm trying not to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but that's what I would suggest. And then you might be more accommodating. But equally, going forward, the rest of the TV shows that are coming look like they're going back to the old model you spoke of, where each one is going to be very, very different in flavor, and they're not all going to be the same as the films became, which were very similar in flavor and style. So that's encouraging, at least.
Yeah, that's really cool. Back in the early days of this podcast, something that we used to labour was the fact that comics just aren't about superheroes. There's, every single little interest or niche that you have can be catered for in comics. And we talked about things like Strangers in Paradise and stuff like that. And this is absolutely the case with the more narrow thing, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's like I say, with WandaVision, based on what you've said, I'll definitely go back and continue it now. But even if I can't watch it, like I say, I'm just really glad that it exists, that they're doing something that actually genuinely feels different, fresh, experimental.
Yeah, I mean, I know someone's kid said they would not watch it, especially the first couple of episodes, because they're in black and white. They just refused point blank. And I was like, wow. Yeah. And I was like, okay, right. Well, all right. The fact that it's being a homage and it's not, anyway, doesn't matter. Anyway, moving on. You may have heard about this. Edgar Wright is going to helm a remake of The Running Man.
No, I hadn't heard that, actually.
So they're saying it'll be based more closely on original work by Stephen King, and it'll be a more faithful adaptation of that. But the film with Arnold Schwarzenegger came out in 1987. And so, yes, Edgar Wright is now working on that with someone else. He's going to co-write it and then direct it.
Is it going to be so? When I think of Edgar Wright, think I'm sure there might well be exceptions to this, but I tend to think of comedy.
He has done more comedy than not.
Right.
Have you seen Baby Driver?
Yes, I have, actually. That's a really good point. I'd forgotten that was one of his. Yeah, and I liked it. I liked it for what it was. Again, going back to the WandaVision thing, I really appreciated that they were trying to do something actually different and interesting with the medium of storytelling in films. And it's not a film that I love, but I actually really liked that they were doing something quite different and quite experimental.
Yeah, that was pretty. I quite enjoyed it. Yeah, something I'd probably watch again. So I don't know. A more faithful adaptation sounds good. I've not actually read the original book, so I might do that at some point before the film, which will probably be out in a couple of years. But it's just another remake. I just kind of think, do something different. But anyway, do you have any more news?
I've got, so since we're talking about remakes anyway, something that I think Barry mentioned, maybe it wasn't Barry, something that one of us mentioned, and I actually read about again today, is it looks like there's going to be a remake of Buck Rogers with George Clooney in the title role.
Yes, it was Barry who talked about this, yes. Yeah.
So what's your first feeling about that?
As long as it's not dark and gritty, as long as they keep some of the fun, as long as they keep some of the wackiness, then great. I think, it's been a long time since the other one, and there's a lot more. The technology's moved on so much that they could do a lot more than they could back then when they were restricted by budget, sets, technology, special effects, and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more you can do in TV than you could back then. So they could do a more interesting show. It's what tone they go for that concerns me. What about you?
I couldn't agree with everything that you said more. So actually, I have a fond, because I watched it as a kid, I'm guessing. I have a fondness for the original Buck Rogers TV show, but objectively, it's a little bit silly and it's a little bit weak. As fond as I am of it, I do kind of at the same time feel like it's crying out for a reboot. The fact that you say they want to keep it sort of light and don't make it go super dark is the one thing that worries me slightly about George Clooney being in it, because he tends to, since his ER days, he now tends to be in things that are quite dark and quite heavy and have some sort of, political leaning towards them.
Yeah.
And I really hope it's not going to turn into some sort of dark, brooding, post-apocalyptic show. I really just want them to keep it episodic and light-hearted, but we'll see. We'll see. It's we hear about stuff being remade, and a lot of the time the reaction is why bother to remake it?
Yep.
In this case, though, actually, I completely agree that this is crying out to be remade. So. Let's just hope they keep some of the things I love about it, but then just throw the rest away.
Yeah. Similar sort of news is recently Scott Bakula was interviewed because he's been doing NCIS New Orleans, one of the many spin-offs from the original NCIS show, which has been going for, I'm not kidding, I think it's 18 seasons now, or 19 seasons. Anyway, so NCIS New Orleans is coming to an end with season 7. And when they were just talking to Scott about this, they said, how would he feel about if they did a revival show of Quantum Leap? And he said if he was given the opportunity, he'd be up for it, because he said the show was very special for him. But obviously, if they did a remake, he'd wish luck to whoever did it, because he says the idea of walking in another man or woman's shoes is so relevant and so important right now. We become so divided in our world, the ability to cross that line of politics and just deal with humanity and the individual person who's sharing a moment on a planet with you is really relevant. He's obviously, there's no talk of it, there's no discussion of it. The interviewer merely raised the question with him, and he said, yep, 1, he'd be up for it. 2, if they did a remake of it of some kind, he wishes them luck. And I think there again, having maybe one of Sam's kids out there doing it, and him handing back, and handing over the torch. It's one of the things where you pay homage to the past, you don't wipe the slate clean, and you pass the torch on to the next generation, and you show them, the respect to the fans, and you do it right. Then I think that would be good. But just having someone else random, or giving, creating a brand, the same character and calling it Sam Beckett and having someone else do it, I think would be pointless. There'd be no need. But some kind of continuation, I think, would be amazing.
Yeah, I agree. He's so associated with Sam Beckett in Quantum Leap that the moment that you said Scott Bakula, I was like, he's definitely going to mention Quantum Leap.
Yeah.
But yeah, do a continuation with his son. And then Scott Bakula could essentially be in the owl role.
Yes. Yeah, that would be good. Why not? Because obviously Dean Stockwell passed away, I believe. So I think he did anyway. I have to check now.
Yeah, let's look that up.
No, he didn't. Oof. Phew. Sorry. He's okay, everyone. He's all right. He's okay. He's 84. He's fine. He's all right.
84. So I think of him not just from Quantum Leap, but from a major role in Battlestar Galactica as well.
Yeah. He's done so many films and TV shows over the years. You'd be amazed when you start going back through his back catalogue. He was in Blue Velvet as well back in '86.
Wow.
Yeah. The guy has done everything. He did a lot of theatre, I think, back in the day, and then he came back to acting and the TV stuff. So, but yeah, something I would be up for, some kind of development of the show. And as Bakula said, what can be more relevant these days than walking a mile in someone else's shoes and being able to see something from the other side? Because a lot of people don't discuss things now. It's agree or you're wrong, and that's kind of it. The idea of exploring an idea or a place or a time through a person, and it essentially is someone else who looks in the mirror. I think now's the perfect time for something like this.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll be honest, as long as when we see whoever the new leaper is, as long as when we see them jump into a new body, just before the opening credits, as long as they say, "Oh boy," then that's fine.
Then we're all good.
That's the one non-negotiable
That's
part.
the
of the
deal
show for me.
breaker.
Yeah.
You must say, "Oh boy," before the credits. But the perfect thing about the show is they can go anywhere and do anything. I just love that. Like, you could have a creepy horror episode, and then the next one it could be something about race, and then the next one it could be about, science or technology or art or culture or gender. It could be anything. He can go anywhere and do anything. One time he was a monkey, remember? He leapt into the body of a monkey that went into space, and of course he couldn't talk. Another time he went into a guy who was a paraplegic. He was a soldier who'd lost his legs, and just it's the limit of the show is only limited by the imagination of the writers.
And there was even a couple of episodes. It was a very episodic show, but there was some tiny little bits of like implications of a wider universe there, because Sam was jumping into people's bodies and like basically helping them out and solving some problem for them, and then he'd jump out and jump into somebody else. But there was a couple of episodes, and if you remember, where they introduced the concept of like evil leapers.
There was one, she was called Eve.
Right.
Yes, and she had the equivalent of Al as well.
Yeah, and they'll leap into somebody's body, like screw up their life, and then move on to the next one.
Yep. And there's an episode where at one point he meets Al, and Al's talking to him, and it's not Al. And the guy says, "Who says you can go around fixing things? It's not up to you." And starts strangling Sam. And it's like, oh my God, Al can touch him. And it's not the real Al, and things like this. There's the idea of moving away from the purely episodic and building up something in the background, like we're more used to these days in television. I mean, the possibilities and the opportunities in that show are limitless. I'd kill to write for a show like that. That would be perfect.
And I remember an episode. We shouldn't go on with this too long, because this is just going to turn into a Quantum Leap show. But I remember there was a 2-part episode where he jumped into Al's body as a young man.
Yes,
when he was in the Navy, I think.
Yes, right, and he's a POW in Vietnam.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Great show.
Yeah, might have to do a Quantum Leap episode if we haven't done one already. Do you have any more news?
No, that was it for me.
I had one bit of other news, but I don't want to talk about it because it's too depressing.
Okay.
So we'll stay positive and stay on Quantum Leap. Right, on to our main feature.
Hello, welcome back. So in this episode's main feature, inspired a little bit by WandaVision being a spin-off show, but just doing something different and interesting, we're going to talk about spin-off shows from other shows, like what we liked, what we didn't like, how they could have maybe done something a bit better, given a different twist on the universe. One of the things that we did before we prepped for the episode was we decided that basically there was going to be a ban on Star Trek, because there's been so many Star Trek spin-offs.
Yes.
That we're just not, and we've talked about Star Trek many times, so we're not going to talk about Star Trek, even though it's obviously super famous for doing many successful spin-offs.
Yeah.
So do you want to kick us off and talk about the first spin-off show that's on your list?
Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 spin-offs from this original show.
Wow.
And I think I've watched some of most of them. So the original show is Doctor Who. Mm-hmm. And the spin-offs are the Sarah Jane Adventures, Class, K9, and Torchwood.
Yes, and I've seen some of. I've not seen all of those. I've seen
Yeah.
some of Torchwood, some of Sarah Jane Adventures, some of, I think you got the name of the K9 one wrong. I think it's called K9 and Company,
All right. Okay.
but not the other one that you mentioned didn't sound familiar to me at all.
Class. Yes, it's like a teen drama-esque high school with kids set within the Doctor Who universe. Yeah,
Right.
I've not watched any of that one, but I'm aware of it. So I watched Torchwood. I watched it quite a lot back in the day, even to the point where they did like an American crossover in an attempt to launch an American version of the show. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that. That must have been after I stopped watching it. But I didn't stop watching it because I hated it. I just kind of drifted away from it, I think.
So they did this 2-part one where Captain Jack there's some sort of alien invasion or something, and Mekhi Phifer, who's an American actor who's been in a few things like ER and other things back in the day, he ended up being in it, and he ended up getting a blood transfusion from Captain Jack to save his life. And because of that, he sort of inherited Captain Jack's powers. And the idea was to then spin off into American version with him and his own team of people doing things. And I've no idea if it even, spawned, if it even continued. I don't think it did go for very long if it did happen. But yeah, so what did you think about Torchwood? What did you think of it when it first started?
I enjoyed it. It was never something like I felt like I was invested in Doctor Who because I've been watching it, my whole life pretty much. Torchwood, I never took to it as massively, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a perfectly fine show. I thought it was quite well cast. I thought it was entertaining storylines. What did you think to it?
I like the idea of it to begin with. I think it was quite exciting because Doctor Who can get a bit boring because even though he can travel through all of time and space, he inevitably ends up in London on Earth.
Yeah.
In medieval, in kind of Victorian times or Elizabethan time. It's just like, oh Lord. And the show has to appeal to all 4 quadrants of the audience demographic, so that it's Saturday evening tea, television show, grannies can watch it, little kids can watch it, adults can watch it, and they all get something from it. Torchwood allowed them to do a lot more adult stories, go in different places, and scratch the itch that you can't always get from Doctor Who, but do different kind of I don't want to say adult because that's not necessarily always adult. It's just exploring different things that you couldn't do on Doctor Who because it focused very much around one person, and Torchwood was more of the more familiar ensemble cast. So you could have someone who's grumpy and doesn't get on with everybody, and they don't suddenly at the end of the show have a change of heart and then they're all okay and they're happy with the Doctor again. It's like you don't have to get along. And I like that you could have an interesting dynamic with different characters, with different strengths and different abilities. And I think as it went on, it went downhill a bit. But to begin with, I think it was a really good idea. And it was the first spin-off that we'd ever have from Doctor Who that had been going for, 40 years at that point or whatever it was.
Yeah, so I think K9 and Company was a very short-lived show that came before that. But I think Torchwood was kind of, not to insult K9 and Company, I think Torchwood was kind of the first proper spin-off.
Yeah. It's probably something they talked about for years and they never got around to it. And then this kind of launched it. And they've been doing it in America with shows for years and years. So what's the next one on your list then?
So I've got one show. There's 2 spin-offs, both of which I found were kind of. So actually, let me start again. It's 2 different versions of the same show, each of which had a spin-off that I think were both kind of failed opportunities in some way.
Okay, interesting.
And that show is Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, so which do you think is the failed opportunity?
So, well, kind of both of the spin-offs. So the spin-off from the original Battlestar Galactica, which was a show set in the 70s, was the absolutely terrible, and I don't know if you remember this or not, Galactica 1980.
Yes.
Which was so the whole point in Battlestar Galactica was they were trying to find this mythical place called Earth. And the idea of Galactica 1980 is that they found it, and it was basically them trying to settle down on Earth, which is a really, really interesting idea that they could have done a lot with. But instead, we left with Galactica 1980, which was an absolutely dreadful show.
I remember the kids had kind of powers that they could almost defy gravity and jump really high and stuff like that. And that's about all I remember of it, because I think it was so bad. I think I stopped watching it even back then.
It was absolutely diabolically bad. But it's a shame because the idea of, they're humans, but from a very high technology place, they're running away from the Cylons, and they've found this mythical place that they were trying to find, and trying to settle down on the planet, try and prepare the planet for a potential future invasion. There's loads of really, really compelling things that they could do and really nice ideas, but we're left with just this second-rate show that I'm presuming that they made because it was cheaper to film Battlestar Galactica in 1980s Los Angeles than it was to pretend to set it in space.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, with all the sets and stuff. It's like, we'll just film in the park. Way! And they run around the park and the kids jump up and down and stuff. Yeah. It wasn't great.
Yeah.
And what was the other spin-off?
So the other spin-off, which I'll be honest, is a show, I think it only lasted one season. It might have been two. I think it was just one season though. And actually, I really, really liked it. I've got a strong feeling though that I could be the only one.
I think you are.
Okay, yeah. And actually part of the reason for liking it might possibly be because at the time it was being filmed, my office was basically on the set, and I could look at it being filmed from my office, and I could walk past like the library next door to my office was turned into a Capricorn building, and opposite it was like the school. It was all going on, and I've got lots of pictures of me in these locations with like signs in Capricorn and stuff like that. And I've given it away because the show is Caprica, and I really liked it. But again, it's nowhere near as bad as Galactica 1980. But I still want to hold it up as kind of a missed opportunity. So to do a show about how the Cylons came to be Cylons and what humanity did to mess up their relationship with them that caused this big, rift. There's lots of really interesting things that you can do with that. And I do as much fondness as I have for the show, and I really am very fond of it. Like we were saying, I'm the only one, and I think there's loads of interesting things that they could have done that they just failed to do.
I think the inherent problem with the show, especially with prequels, is you already know the final destination.
Yeah.
It's one of the main problems, not the only one, with the Star Wars prequels.
Yeah.
That you know what happens to all the main characters at the end of it, and you're just ticking things off, waiting for it to happen. And in this, you're like, well, at some point they're going to fail to understand the machines that they're developing. They're going to fall apart. There's going to be a disagreement, and the machines are going to go to war with them. So you're just waiting for that. I mean, the way it's not a spoiler really, but the way that the new Ronald D. Moore Battlestar Galactica show ends is not very clear. The ending is a bit ambiguous, and it perhaps would have been more interesting to go forward into the unknown where you don't know anything. Or if they were doing a prequel, it would be to go back even further so that there's no direct ties. Like they're doing a Game of Thrones spin-off that's something like 1,000 years before. And it's, as far as I know, it's not really been explored much in the books. It might have been in, George Martin's world building Bible for the whole of the world. But beyond that, there are not going to be any massive connections. You're not waiting for someone to turn up and go, oh yeah, in 10 years time he loses his arm and blah 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 and this, that, and the other. There's none of that. So maybe they could have done that to make it work a bit more independent. But because it was an interesting society that they'd created with this different mythology, different religions, the 12 kind of signs of the zodiac representing the 12 planets, because it wasn't Earth, it was 12 other, planets that they lived on. And so I don't know, I was just waiting for things to happen, and I just felt a bit bored after a while. But as you say, it lasted one season in 2010, and that was it, unfortunately.
Yeah, interesting idea. And like you say, going forwards could have been really cool, because I think one of the themes that was sort of starting to come out towards the end of the main Battlestar Galactica show was that actually this is kind of a cyclical thing that's happened, times before, and is continuing to happen. So actually, seeing the cycle begin again in the future would have been really interesting. But yeah, as much funness as I have for it, I definitely see it as an interesting idea, but kind of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So the next one I was going to talk about is it is a spin-off really, because it kind of spawned a whole universe of shows, is that what began with Arrow in 2012. So you think, oh, it's not that long ago. And you think, oh, Caprica was 2010. Arrow started in 2012.
Wow.
It wasn't that long after. And Arrow spawned, let me get my list, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Supergirl. Indirectly, you got things like Black Lightning, Superman and Lois, which is coming up, Batwoman. I'm sure I'm forgetting some other ones. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that have, some have been in development, some have come and gone. They were going to do Black Canaries one, that never happened in the end. Yeah, all came out of Arrow with Stephen Amell way back in 2012, which is now 11 years.
Wow, that's incredible. That it was
9 years. 9 years ago, isn't it?
Even then, that's still amazing that it was that long ago.
Yeah.
So what do you think before we talk about the spin-offs, what do you think to Arrow itself?
I think it started really, really well. And the first 5 years had a very tight core concept of the thing of every season of the show would reflect in flashbacks one of his years spent on the island where he was training and becoming this weapon. And he then came back to the city and started fighting for his city and so on. The problem is, in that first season, he was really hardcore. He killed people. He was, taking no soft approach to criminals. And then they started to kind of lose their nerve a bit, I think. And then they made him, he's not going to kill people anymore. He's just going to wound them. And you're like, well, okay. And then he's told this person and that person, oh, all right now. Now everybody knows. And it went on for 8 seasons in the end. And I think, like Supernatural, as fun as some of those later episodes are, if they'd stuck to the original core premise, it might have been a tighter show and a better show. But that's just me, Did you watch it at all back in the day?
I watched it, but I didn't really stick with it. But kind of a bit like Torchwood. It wasn't because I decided to give up on it because I didn't like it. It was just something that I never enthused me enough to want to stick with it. Having said that, the one spin-off from it that I watched, I definitely haven't kept up with it, but the one spin-off that I watched at least a couple of complete seasons of was Supergirl.
Yeah.
And there was the crossover between Supergirl and the Flash show, wasn't there?
Yes.
I think just as Flash was starting. But I never watched Flash, or actually I don't think I've seen any of those other spin-offs that you were talking about as well.
Yeah, Legends of Tomorrow and stuff.
So how did you find the spin-offs?
Flash there again started off really, really well. It was really interesting. That first season of Flash, actually, you could just watch the first season of Flash, and it's not, it's not standalone from the rest, but there's a fairly good story that runs through that whole first season, and it's really good. It's really, really good. And after a while, it just got really formulaic. He built up a team of allies who've all got powers, and then they go out and fight different people in the city. And it's like, we've had that for Arrow for, 6 years at that point or whatever it was. And it just felt a bit like, you could have done so much more with it, but it just fell into familiar patterns. And then they brought out Supergirl, and then the same sort of thing happened again. Starts interesting, starts quite different, trying new things, and then it just settles down and becomes something a bit homogenous like the others. The only one that's remained consistently bonkers is Legends of Tomorrow.
Right, which I've never seen.
Right, every season is completely batshit crazy. Every few episodes, they do something weird and different. They're constantly jumping through time and doing different things. And it has seasonal arcs as well, but it's really radical. People of the cast come and go. Some die, some leave. So it's the most weird. And everyone was thinking, it'll just be cancelled. And it's like, nope, it's now been going for something like 5-6 seasons. So just by being a bit different, which is probably a good thing, given that you've had 3 shows that became very, very similar.
So do you think the problem with these shows is that they come from an era, like, it's not that long ago, but they kind of come from an era where you're trying to do 22 or 24 episodes a season, whereas nowadays a season will be like 10 episodes and it'll be really tight and it'll be like just a really long movie or something like that. Do you think the problem stems from the fact that they just kind of had to fill the time a little bit?
Part of it, but also I think the core audience is much younger. It's, we're kind of at the tail end, the upper spectrum of the core audience now, I would say. And some of them, it's not, you can't even say that they don't want series that are connected and that have standalone episodes, because they've grown up in an era that they're used to shows that have seasonal arcs and that are connected. But it is an old model of TV. That's the problem. With so many new streaming platforms coming online all the time and so many things getting folded in, I wonder if the era of 22 episode seasons will soon die. And to be honest, from a storytelling perspective on TV, I think it can only be a good thing, especially with these kind of shows. Daredevil is still, for me, one of the best TV shows, superhero shows that have done on television, because that was on Netflix and it was 10, 12 episodes a season. And, quality goes up and down, but it's so tight and there's no fat on that show at all. Whereas you could watch the first 2 in a season and the last 2, and you'll probably be fine on some of these shows, because they all have previously on and just give you the highlight clips, and you're like, well, I'm up to speed now. Okay, forwards.
Yeah, completely. And I completely agree about Daredevil. Like Daredevil, that's a format that's kind of more common these days.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not to take anything away from Daredevil at all, but it felt when we were watching it that was something really new and refreshing and interesting.
Yeah, it was really special. And I did a rewatch recently and it was still really good. So what's your next one? Do you have any more?
So I've read out. So looking into this, it amazed me how many spin-off shows there were. Like there's hundreds of them.
Yep.
I kind of didn't want to mention this as one that I thought this was a missed opportunity. It could do so much better. But actually, it did such a great job as a spin-off. And I know it's a show that you really like. And I just wanted to kind of mention Buffy and its spin-off Angel. Yes.
That was on my list, yeah.
Yeah, because I'll be honest, I really kept up with Buffy. I didn't follow Angel as closely as I would have wanted, but that was because back in the day when Angel was on, it wasn't like Netflix where you can just like watch any episode at any time.
No.
It was much harder to keep up with.
Oh
then.
yeah.
And I didn't really stick with it, and because I'm a bit of a completionist, if I miss an episode, that show is dead to me until I can like watch that episode and then keep up with it. And with Angel, I just never managed to do that. But I know that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your opinion of Angel is higher than it is of Buffy.
I think so. Yeah, I've rewatched Angel more than I've done. I did a rewatch within the last sort of 3 years of all of Angel, and it's a slight. You can do more in Angel than you can with Buffy, only because the first 4 or 5 seasons of Buffy is that she's restricted because she's in school, then she's in college or university, we'd say, and it's only kind of after that where she's trying to earn a living and get a job that the doors have kind of lifted a bit more. But at that point, some of the shackles are already in place, as it were. With Angel, they almost blow the show up at the end of every season and change the structure and the focus and the position of the show because they can. And there again, they can do more adult stories. So there aren't as many constraints. And some of the stuff they do in that show are brilliant. It's so good. And, the performances, we've talked about it before, one of the best transformations of one of the characters ever on TV starts in Buffy and finishes in Angel.
That's Cordelia? Oh, no, Wesley.
Wesley Wyndham-Pryce, who starts off as this nerdy, pathetic, cowardly watcher, and by the end of Angel, he's someone so different, so and the acting, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It was a very adult show with very adult themes that they did get into, to be fair, on Buffy later on, but not in the same way. And there's probably more comedy in Buffy. There was some balance that had to be in Angel because it was a lot darker, but it wasn't to the same degree as Buffy. They recently, not to get into any of the stuff that's in the news, but recently somebody asked Sarah Michelle Gellar if she would be interested in a remake or a continuation of Buffy as her as an older woman, as someone more her own age, and she said no. If they did a remake or something, that would be fine, but she wouldn't want to continue with it. And I wonder what if they did a spin-off show now from that universe, because as we said, Marvel are doing spin-off from their thing, and CW and Flash and DC have done spin-offs from their shows. What if they did a spin-off now from the kind of Buffy and Angel verse? That would be an interesting idea to explore. Very
it would be, because at the end of Buffy, kind of the whole world had changed, hadn't it? Like the whole point of Buffy was into every generation a slave is born.
Yes.
But at the end of Buffy, which continued in the comics, like they did a Buffy season 8 and beyond that, possibly.
Yeah, beyond that, they did like up to like 10 or 12 or something. Yeah.
But the ending of the TV show was that actually every potential Slayer became a Slayer. And that's a really interesting thing to explore. But the show had run out at that point. That happened in like the final episode of season 7.
Yeah, and slight spoiler for those who haven't seen the end of season 7. There's no more Sunnydale, so they can't carry on telling stories in that town. They have to go somewhere else. So I don't know, but doing a show now would be an interesting approach. It'll never happen, but there are ways to explore it. They've done it in the comics on Buffy and Angel. I had one more quick one, which I haven't actually watched any of the spin-offs because I don't want to, but I thought I'd mention it.
Are you going to talk about Baywatch Nights as being a spin-off of Baywatch?
I love Baywatch Nights. No. Walking Dead and all of the spin-offs from The Walking Dead.
So I watched the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead.
Yep.
And enjoyed it. But like I've said with other shows, I just kind of drifted off of them. But it was a conscious decision to stop watching The Walking Dead. Not because I really disliked it, but just because I felt like everything that this show has to give me, it's already given me.
Yeah.
I just don't have the energy to try and keep up with it anymore. So I'm very dimly aware of shows like Fear the Walking Dead
Yep.
and spin-off shows, but I know absolutely nothing about them other than the spin-offs from The Walking Dead.
Yeah. So there's Fear the Walking Dead, which is set in another part of the country, and eventually they have a crossover. It's almost like just after the outbreak.
Right.
Of what's happening, whereas in the show, it's a bit different. And then the other spin-off that they've done, which I think is now going to be like a limited run, is where there are some teenagers who are the main characters, and they're the first generation to grow up in that world, not having known anything before. So they've been born since walkers have been around.
So that's an interesting idea.
It is, but I still think it's just going to fall into the same kind of traps as the other shows. Like, for the same reason as you, I watched the first few seasons and I just got kind of bored. And I was like, we've done this a lot. And it's just the same rinse and repeat cycle. Things aren't really evolving. I'm not seeing the world change. I'm not seeing the stories change. Characters come and go because they keep getting eaten. So they bring in new characters. And I'm like, yeah, now you're just apart from one or two who stay, the rest are, get wiped out, and someone else comes in, and I'm like, nah, I just got bored. So, but the teenagers thing, I don't know, unless they can do something really interesting with it. But I've just not bothered. I know it's huge; it's such a big monster of a show, but I think, given everything that's happened in the last few years, such dark TV is going to probably tail off for a while. Especially the fact that it's based upon a contagion.
You're much more positive about that than I am, because I have a strong feeling that the TV season of 2022 is going to be, every sci-fi show is going to be about pandemics. I think they can be so lacking in imagination. They can do the most imaginative things, but I think that just in this case, every single writer out there is going to be pitching as a showrunner for a contagion-based sci-fi show. And I think we're just going to be, I think for the next 3 or 4 years, that's all there's going to be on TV.
I'll be watching a lot of repeats of The Mandalorian then.
I really hope that I'm wrong. I really do.
Do you have any more?
No, there was some other things I put on the list, but nothing in particular worth mentioning, to be honest. No, I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, because there's so many. There's so many from all the Stargate shows and the CSI shows.
Oh yeah, the Stargate shows I've got listed.
24.
Obviously, the 3 spin-offs from Happy Days.
Yeah.
Laverne and Shirley. Jodie Love Chachi.
Yeah.
And Mork and Mindy was a spin-off from Happy Days.
Yes, of course. Yes, Nanu, and
yeah.
Baywatch Nights. Never forget that. There are so many shows. We could have talked about, but
there was hundreds. I was amazed at the number of spin-offs. Like, it's literally hundreds. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
Shows I never even knew were spin-offs.
Like what?
Spin-offs. I can't. I did most of them. I didn't bother to write down.
Right.
But, loads of stuff out there. It was crazy.
Well, I didn't realize that the Bionic Woman was a spin-off of The $1 Million Man until fairly recently. But it makes sense when you think about it. But all these things get remade and rebooted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of your favorite shows and favorite spin-offs? Are there any spin-offs that are superior to the original? That would be an interesting thing. If you've got any opinions on that, get in touch and let us know. You can email us, grouchygeeks@gmail.com. You can come onto the Facebook group there and talk to us about this episode and all the other stuff we're talking about. Don't forget to check out the other podcast on the Geek Syndicate feed and check out the website, geeksyndicate.co.uk. And we'll be back next month with another episode. But in the meantime, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.